If you were to look up legacy in the dictionary, there's a good chance you would see J.R.R. Tolkien's picture in there. J.R.R. Tolkien was born John Ronald Reuel Tolkien in 1892 in South Africa. At the age of 3, J.R.R. Tolkien and his mother moved back to the UK, and then in 1914, J.R.R. Tolkien would end up fighting for the English in World War One. J.R.R. Tolkien actually ended up fighting in some pretty bloody battles, including Battle of Somme, in which he actually ended up writing numerous pieces of what would soon to be his some of his biggest literature pieces in the trenches of World War One. Some of those that were written and compiled after his death by Christopher Tolkien, his son, would be the pieces of the Silmarillion. There's the Lost Tales, the Unfinished Tales. They were all written on like scrap pieces of paper that after his death, Christopher Tolkien found and then compiled into these works, which is why you kind of get similar stories or different versions of those same stories in each one of those different books. After World War One, J.R.R. Tolkien went on to work at the Oxford Dictionary, and after Oxford Dictionary, he began his stint as professor at different schools, starting with the Women's College first, and then eventually ending up working at Oxford College. During his time at Oxford, he became a member of the literary group called the Inklings, in which there's a very famous member named C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien began a friendship that would last the rest of their lives. They're best friends. C.S. Lewis obviously wrote The Chronicles of Narnia, Mere Christianity. He also wrote Screwtape's Letters. In fact, J.R.R. Tolkien was actually someone who was very pivotal in C.S. Lewis going from being an atheist to a Christian. C.S. Lewis would actually go on to nominate J.R.R. Tolkien for the Nobel Literature Prize later on in life. In 1937, J.R.R. Tolkien was kind of pressured to publish this kid's book that he had been working on. And so he kind of relented, and then he just decided to release it. And so The Hobbit was released, which became a massive success. Later on, in 1954, J.R.R. Tolkien would go on to release and publish The Lord of the Rings, which is it's been named by multiple different establishments the most important piece of literature in the 20th century, the most important piece of literature of the millennium. The interesting thing about The Lord of the Rings is that not only did J.R.R. Tolkien create these intricate worlds where there's, people think of orcs as elves, well, that came from The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien Middle-earth world, in which in the First Age, Melkor, the bad god, so to speak, took elves and twisted them into his own creation, which ended up becoming orcs. That's where that came from. Elvish, he constructed three different dialects of Elvish, which is Kenya, Noldori, and then Kenya, and then another one. And then men actually didn't speak English in it. They speak a language called Manish. And then the Black speech, the Kirith, which is what the dwarves speak. So there's numerous different languages that were actually invented by J.R.R. Tolkien, whole worlds of languages that were invented. Later on in J.R.R. Tolkien's life, he would end up being appointed a commander of the Order of the British Empire by Queen Elizabeth II in 1972. And then in the following year, J.R.R. Tolkien would sadly be deceased in 1973, in which on his tombstone, his wife's tombstone, his said Baron and his wife said Luthien, which is a story from the Silmarillion, which is arguably one of the greatest stories of all time. But if you just look back on the life that J.R.R. Tolkien lived, the renown that he had achieved in literature, in academia, he was on the bench for being a code breaker for World War II. He just never ended up getting called for it. In creating languages, in mythology, he is truly one of the great minds who ever existed, and I do not believe that his work should be forgotten.